Winter had taken hold of the world, a season of gray skies, lifeless trees, and snow that fell like ash from some distant, dying fire. It wasn't just cold, it was an emptiness that seemed to seep into everything. I had always loved winter, though. Strange, isn't it? To love something so desolate? But for me, winter was a reflection of my soul, a mirror to the quiet, colorless place within. Yet that day, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, the shadows longer. Beneath the dull rhythm of the day lurked a sense of unease, an unspoken warning. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was coming. The day had started well, almost unusually so. My morning routine went smoothly, and every little task fell into place like pieces of a puzzle. When I returned home, it was to an empty house. My parents had left for a trip out of state, visiting my older brother. I was alone, and at first, I thought I would enjoy the quiet. But the stillness felt wrong, oppressive. It wasn't the comforting solitude I had expected. I should have known better. The last time I felt this way, a stray dog attacked me out of nowhere. It tore through my face, leaving my lips split clean in two. Even now, I could feel the ghost of that wound whenever I touched my face. The scar was nearly invisible, but the memory of the pain lingered, just beneath the surface. I live on the edge of a small town in the Midwest. It's a quiet place, populated mostly by retirees and old, weathered houses that seem to lean against each other for support. Power outages were common here, and the streetlights barely worked. At night, the streets were so dark they might as well have been abandoned. The entire neighborhood carried an air of quiet decay, as if it had resigned itself to being forgotten. After grabbing a quick snack, I headed to my room. It's a small, cramped space, barely large enough to fit a double bed, a computer desk, and a writing table. Everything was packed so tightly that to sit at either desk, I had to climb over the bed. It wasn't ideal, but it was mine, a little sanctuary. I settled in, scrolling idly through social media, chatting with friends. Outside, the light was fading fast. By the time I looked up from my screen, the window was framed in darkness. Snowflakes danced silently against the glass, fragile and fleeting. I stared at them, lost in thought. Winter nights have a way of amplifying your loneliness. I thought about my life, my choices, or lack of them, and the monotonous cycle of my days. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like an ache, a quiet longing for something I couldn't name. My mind drifted to practical concerns. Tomorrow, I'd have to shovel the snow from the driveway. The thought filled me with a strange weariness, as if the effort was already too much to bear. Then it happened, a sharp, loud noise from the attic. My heart jumped. At first, I tried to brush it off. Cats. It had to be the stray cats that used the attic as their winter refuge. I'd heard them before, their restless movements and muffled meows. But this was different. The sound was louder, more violent, like something larger was up there. Before I could process it, the house was plunged into darkness. The power had gone out, as it often did in storms, but this time it felt deliberate, almost personal. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness that feels alive. I fumbled for my flashlight, the old one I kept on my desk. Its beam was faint and flickered occasionally, but it was better than nothing. I climbed over my bed and made my way through the house, the beam of light cutting through the dark. Every shadow seemed to shift as I passed, transforming into grotesque shapes. The coat rack in the hall became a gaunt figure reaching for me with skeletal hands. A pile of laundry in the corner resembled a collapsed body. My breath quickened, and I had to remind myself that none of it was real. When I reached the circuit panel, I found everything in place. The breakers hadn't tripped. That meant the problem was with the main line, and I'd have to wait for the power company to fix it. I sighed, the flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. Then I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger as I stood there, a sickening mix of sulfur, burning flesh, and metal. My stomach turned. I swung the flashlight toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. A creature stood in the dim light, its form hunched and grotesque. Its legs bent backward, like those of a deer, but thicker, muscular, and wrong. Its hands, if you could call them that, were large and human-like, covered in filthy, matted fur. The fur was gray, almost white, and clung to its emaciated frame in uneven patches. Its face was narrow, with ears too large for its head, and its eyes. They were pure white, empty yet piercing. They bore into me, and for a moment, I couldn't move. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The creature stood there, unmoving, its gaze locked on mine. Then, slowly, it bared its teeth, a row of jagged, yellow fangs. A low growl rumbled from its throat, a sound so guttural it seemed to vibrate through the air. It wasn't an animal's growl. It was something else entirely, something unnatural. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I turned and ran, my feet carrying me to the bathroom. Slamming the door shut, I locked it with trembling hands and backed away. My flashlight was still in the kitchen, its faint glow casting eerie shadows beneath the door. Outside, the growling grew louder, followed by a series of heavy thuds against the door. Each impact sent a shiver through me. I pressed myself against the cold tile wall, my chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. The thing outside wanted in, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Time became meaningless. The pounding stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt like the creature was still there, waiting. I could almost see it in my mind, standing on its twisted legs, its pale hands brushing the door as it tried to understand why it couldn't open it. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, the bathroom was freezing, and my body was stiff from lying on the hard floor. The house was silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there, lurking just beyond my reach. I opened the door cautiously. The kitchen was empty, but the window was wide open. Snow had blown in, covering the floor in a thin layer. Tracks led from the window to the front door and disappeared into the night. The creature was gone, but its presence lingered, a shadow in my mind. That night, I learned what it meant to be truly afraid. Not the fear of danger or pain, but the primal terror of the unknown. I thought I loved winter, but now I see it differently. Winter isn't just cold. It's a season of shadows, of things that don't belong in the light. And every time the snow falls, I feel it watching, waiting for its moment to return.